What I'd like to talk with you about in the next hour or so is about collective sense making.
Yep.
What tools we have to make sense of our shared world, what tools we did have but now have perhaps forgotten how to use, and the tools we may be able to develop. I'd like to frame this inquiry, if you will, by briefly laying out my own viewpoint on the issue, if I may. It seems to me to be starkly apparent that there is now very little interest from all quarters in high quality conversation. I know you and I have spoken about this in the past.
Yeah.
And I'm even tempted to conclude that everyone I know, and indeed I include myself here, have recently been guilty of making instant opponents out of those who've got a kind of digressive viewpoint, and thinking of these opponents in almost villainous terms and making them into straw men, as it were. Whereas if we consider what has become the somewhat lost art of the Socratic method of dialogue, which is to be not only genuinely interested in the viewpoints of others, but also to employ the kind of skill of understanding and arguing from their viewpoint also, which is steel manning in modern speak.
Mm-hmm.
So in the next half an hour, I'd like to talk with you about the collective sense making, and then for the second half of the podcast, I'd like to talk with you about the effects of perhaps faulty collective sense making. So just to circle back, I'll ask you more pointedly, what do you think, Mike, about modern collective sense making and the tools we have and have not?
That's a great question. So, making sense. I think to begin with, just the term making sense is worth kind of digging into, right? Because sense making sense, the implication in the wording is that you're creating something, right? It's a creative act. In other words, to look at the world, right? To look around you, to see what's going on, to see chaos and order kind of mixed, and to get a coherent picture of something out of that is like that itself is inherently creative. It's creative. It's part of it is you're observing things, but there's also an imaginative piece to it, right? Because there's so much information in the world, right? That you can't, and there's so little of you that you can't, that the sense you make of the world doesn't only come from facts in the way we think about empirical facts and science and things. It can't only come from that. The sense you make of the world can't only come from what is sensible in the original sense of the term, what is available to your senses. The sense you get of the world comes partly from inside you and partly from, because we are social creatures, the way we kind of align ourselves with other creatures like us. And this is why, when we say like human beings are social creatures, people don't realize how deep that goes. They kind of think it means human beings are animals that like to hang out together. That's not all that means. What it means is like that literally common sense, right, comes from the sociability of human beings, right? Common sense, the sense of the world that we have in common, right, comes from us kind of observing the world, imagining things about the world, and observing other people, imagining things about other people, putting ourselves in the shoes of other people, imagining what other people are thinking and feeling, what have you, and that whole big, it's a whole big, messy, complicated thing, but it boils down to, we can walk around and kind of have a general understanding of the world that more or less jives with the general understanding of the world that other people around us have. And if there's a critical mass of people who are kind of more or less synced up on that, what you have is a society. Right, which if you have a bunch of people who kind of more or less align on certain kind of basic habits and norms and kind of unwritten rules and what have you, and they can all make common sense of the world, you have a society, right? And so I don't think it's an accident that, for example, Antonio Gramsci, the socialist, said that if I can destroy common sense, I can destroy society, right? And I think so. Circling back to your question, you know, we are common sense is under attack because we are under attack, because we're in the middle of a war. We're in the middle of a very unique kind of war that we really haven't seen before, because it's being conducted because it's mostly non-kinetic. It's mostly not people running around and blowing stuff up, although there is a little bit of that too. But it's a psychological war. It's biological. It's informational. It's economic, right? And it's got class elements in it as well. And so it's very interesting that you picked the topic of making sense, or sense making, or for this first podcast, because that might be one of the most important things we've got to get a handle on if we're going to have any tactical footing, never mind strategic footing, in this war whatsoever. How can we make sense of things? With whom can I make common sense? Just like people come together, they make common cause in service of something. Well, with whom can I make common sense, and how? So that's my initial take on that question. Is that common sense is under attack? And I'm glad to drill down into, like, you know, who's attacking it and why. But you know, fundamentally, I think that what we're looking at is a challenge to common sense as such, and so that's why it's so difficult to make sense of things, because our ability to make sense of things has been challenged aggressively. And to the extent that we buy into the things, to the extent that we buy into, or to the extent that we allow ourselves to be vulnerable to the weapons the enemy is using to destroy common sense, to the extent that we allow ourselves to be vulnerable to that, because it is a choice, right? That is the extent to which we allow our ability to make sense to be degraded. Like, specifically to the extent that I, as a Black American, right, to the extent that I allow myself to turn my real knowledge of actual racism into resentment against people with a certain color skin that's not mine, right? I have destroyed my ability to make sense of the world. I've done violence to my ability to look at things and figure things. And it's not as if, you notice that, you know, we've talked before, right? It's like, you know, I'm not one of these hacks talking about racism is gone and it doesn't exist and whatever. No, it's like all that stuff is real. You know, sexism is real, racism is real. You know, all these things are real. All these things that the noisy left likes to harp on. I mean, all those things are real. Many of the things that I guess you call the woke contingent makes a lot of noise about, in my opinion, a lot of stupid noise, there's a kernel of truth there. There are legitimate grievances there. And the problem isn't so much necessarily always that the people talking to us, that our opponents, that our enemies, have not put their fingers on any facts. That's not necessarily it. Very often what it is that they have the sense they make of those facts, right? The conclusions they draw from those facts don't make any goddamn sense. You know what I'm saying? But because...
So why do the conclusions make sense to them?
Why do the conclusions make sense to them? That's a good question. I think there's a couple of reasons. I think one thing is that a lot of the people driving war on common sense. And, you know, BLM is, for example, a frontline combatant in the war against common sense. Antifa is a frontline combatant in the war against common sense. To the extent that the BBC has gone down a woke pathway, they're a frontline combatant in the war against common sense. Now, the question was, why does it not make sense?
Do you think that the BBC are allying themselves with movements such as BLM and Wokerati on Twitter, or do you think that they are either captured them within and hence there's a natural ally, or do you think there are other forces that, like survival,
Mm.
that they think if they don't ally themselves with these prominent movements, then they can't imagine themselves in a future where, without allyship of the left.
Oh, that's a great question. I think it's probably all of the above, right? I mean, I think that I don't think that there's necessarily a kind of a sinister cabal meeting in a soy-filled room to discuss how to undermine common sense in British society or what have you. But what I do think is, it's probably all of the above. There are probably some people who are true believers, right? And there are other people who are just going along to get along, right? And there are probably other people making business decisions and doing kind of unconscious threat inflation, right? Which happens with big nervous all bureaucracies are kind of inherently nervous, right? Because all bureaucracies are almost always staffed by relatively useless people. And so people who are relatively useless are relatively defenseless. And so they're nervous about everything. And this is just true. Bureaucrats are nervous across the board, always, which is why they have to be kept to a respectable minimum and why we have to manage their size, because it's dangerous to have, nervous people with a whole lot of power. That's the real argument for limited government and for smaller government and for less bureaucracy. It's not that bureaucrats are evil. It's that they're nervous. And if they're nervous and very powerful, they can do a lot of damage very quickly. Behind nothing. They jump at shadows and like it has real consequences. The bureaucrats jump at shadows and land on you. and
there's plenty of bureaucracy in the BBC. I think they've allowed pollution into their they've allowed intellectual pollution into the organisation, and what that's done is muddied the waters. But there's so much mud in there that it's now solidified, and what the output that you have is shaped mud.
Correct.
So I like to think of it. So, the output, the BBC's output, their news output, their drama output, their comedy output, is shaped mud.
Yes.
And it's very difficult for them to be able to deconstruct or cleanse. To pop something in there to cleanse that water and to clear it up, because the roots of that are now so deep, and it's so confusing for them to be able to work their way out of that mud and clear that water.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because so it's intellectual pollution. I mean, I think that I know what you mean, although I wouldn't use that term. Maybe I'd say it's because it's more like, it's not like pollution. It's more because pollution implies, because remember, the idea isn't really, our side, to the extent that we have a side, or the foundationist side, which really is my side, says that, you have to set the bar very high. Free speech is a near absolute. There are exceptions to it. There are limitations on it, but you have to set the bar very high for those. And so, there is what you don't want purity. I guess, pollution is the flip side of purity. And the problem is, ironically, that they're seeking a kind of purity, right? So
I understand. It's a good distinction to make.
Exactly. It's really more like corruption. It's more like rot. Okay. It's not that something has been introduced that is muddying the water. It's more like the very way that the chemical composition of the thing has changed. How can I put it?
It's solidified. Instead of being a healthy, muddy water.
Right, exactly, right.
Microbes and things that you can grow things within and introduce new ideas, and it will form new. It's now.
Exactly. That's a very good. It's like, what it's like? It's like you think of a pond, or like a healthy pond, which is an ecosystem, right? Yes. Which has very many things, but they're all kind of in their place and they're intermingling and they're what have you. And this is as opposed to a monoculture, right? And the thing about monocultures is that they're fragile, right? So that, you can, for example, run an aquarium full of cloned fish, or full of fish that are all of the same type and kind of all that. But the more genetically aligned all the fish in your aquarium are, right, the easier it is for one infection or one infestation of something to wipe everyone out, right? And so monocultures are fragile. And because we're dealing with, because remember, the BBC is a communications apparatus, okay? It's supposed to be an adjunct to the public square. And because society is partly a machine for solving problems together, like that's what it's there for, right? It's for us to be able to think together, to solve problems together. The problem is that if by definition, if you have a society that's trying to approach problems only in one way, okay, then that society is crippling itself. It's not bringing to bear the kind of the richness of variation in thought that lets a society kind of flow around a problem and attack it from different directions and let different ideas kind of percolate up or die away depending on how operationally useful they are. So I'm going on for a bit, but circling back, circling back to your core thing, it's like the BBC and organizations like it. Yes, it's more, I would say it's more corruption than pollution. And again, not financial corruption. This isn't necessarily money changing hands, but it's rot. It's a disintegration of its kind of structural integrity. And by the way, when human organizations disintegrate like that, very often what the problem is that the spirit has fled from the organization, meaning people have forgotten what the organization is for. All right. And they've ceased to ask fundamental questions. They've ceased to ask foundational questions. The roots of an organization are in its kind of foundational purposes. Why are we here? What are we here for? And it really does pay for a person or an institution or a government every now and then to ask those questions. Okay, what are we doing? Okay, why are we doing that? Why? Where we're doing this, we're the so-and-so broadcasting corporation and we're here to serve, let's say British society. Well, what is British society? What is it? What is it for? Right? If we can't reason about those things, then we're lost, right? Now, the good news is that the BBC is simply a bureaucracy. It's a bureaucracy that is very well equipped, has a lot of infrastructure, has a lot of microphones and network-connected recording apparatus. It's not, the BBC is not your society, right? The bad news is that to the extent that that institution has been ideologically captured, it can make ordinary people who are usually much more sensible think that they're in the minority. Like, common sense is still actually pretty common, right? Again, that's the good news. It's not really the case that no one believes in common sense anymore and everyone's gone crazy behind it. It's not like that at all. It's just that we are being shown this again and again and again, right? And it's making us think that this is the whole world. This is everyone. No, it's not like that at all. No, this is a relatively small handful of very noisy people making a whole lot of noise, and because they've captured networks, entire networks, okay, and they can broadcast. Can I just interject there? Go ahead.
Just as you said that,
yeah.
Previously, when you said about an infestation, and I was thinking almost like if you introduce Japanese knotweed onto a lawn, after a while it's not fit for purpose. You don't sit on it, with your, to sit on it and lie on it because it's all gnarly and horrible, etc. Mm-hmm. So you've introduced a dominant strain,
yes,
of a pathogen or whatever has been introduced to that ecosystem. In this case, we're talking about leftist idealism being introduced into the BBC.
Yes.
So if we take that, shouldn't we also say that it's not a small group of people anymore? It maybe once was a small group of idealistic people, but now that ideal has spread to such a point where the collective sense-making apparatus is confused, so the people inside of that organisation that would have otherwise gone along with a more variant, mixed, day-to-day operation, and now living inside this infestation.
I see what you mean.
What you've got is it starts with a small group of people, and now it captures the larger group, and everything else gets pushed out of that larger group. How do we deal with that wholesale capture?
Yeah, I see what you mean. Well, so here's the thing. It's I see what you mean, but let me run this by you. What's the population of the UK? Like
65 million, I think.
60-something million, right? Between 60 and 70 million. Okay, how many people work for the BBC?
Probably about 2,000 or something, 3,000.
Okay, so statistically speaking, there are 0 people working for the BBC. Do you see what I'm saying? Like 2,000 out of 65 million is nothing. Now, here's the thing. The reason why they have such a disproportionate impact is, again, because they're sitting on top of a lot of infrastructure and a lot of network-connected, recording apparatus, right? Now, I'm not saying that's nothing. That is consequential. They are able to, because of that, the BBC is able to punch far above its weight. But that is what it is doing. It is punching far above its weight. It's not a heavyweight. It's not. It's the nature of its infrastructure is that of a gigantic force multiplier. BBC is not, and no broadcast apparatus is the sole mechanism for sense making in the UK.
The BBC does have form. It has cultural weight and form.
It has That's why it's so dangerous. Remember, I'm not saying it's not dangerous, right? I'm not saying it's not a threat. What I'm saying is that first we have to understand the magnitude of the threat and really look at it, clinically almost.
Look at it in terms of people power.
People power, exactly. Right. Because here's why that's important. Because moving away from the BBC, let's stay on the BBC for a second. So, the BBC gets a lot of its, so for example, how does the BBC pay for infrastructure? Well, in part by means of the license fee, right? That's not all of it, but some, okay. Well, if enough people stop paying the license fee, or they decide, I don't want it anymore, thank you, no, okay? Then now your adversary is vulnerable, right? You can hit them in the supply lines, so to speak, okay? Which is very different from thinking that it's this omnipotent force that's just draped over all of society and there's no hope. That's all I'm saying. So again, it's not that it is not a threat. It's that we have to understand the nature of the threat. The actual numbers we're talking about are the numbers of people, in terms of people power, are minuscule. This is the same, actually, across all if we think about the oligarchs who we say, quote unquote, run society, right? Think about, like, in my country, right? So America is a country of 1/3 of a billion people. 1/3 of a billion people. Okay, now you take all the people in America who own television stations, movie chains, newspapers, major social media companies, and maybe you could throw in major movie studios. Take all the people who are at the heads of all those organizations. All those people could fit in a restaurant. In other words, like, compared to 1/3 of a billion people, there are 0 of them, right? So then the question is now, okay, so now you have some perspective. Now you say, okay, well then how are they able to wield so much influence? Well, they can wield influence because of this and that. But exact hierarchy, influence, networks, force multipliers. Okay, so now the question is, how can you interrupt those force multipliers? How can you rob them of that influence? And it's possible to do. People talk about, you've heard me talk about big social media before. I refuse to call it big tech. Big social media before. Well, Facebook is very influential. But it's influential because people use Facebook. If people didn't use it, it would have no influence. Now, that's very different from the influence of, a foreign army landing on the shores of your country in force and occupying territory, by the blunt instrument of thousands upon thousands of young men with automatic weapons. That's a very different kind of thing. This is not that. This is a very small group of people speaking into a network-connected microphone. Well, what happens when you log off that network? What happens when you just say, yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not going to listen? Because remember, especially with big social media now, I know we switch gears from BBC to social media, but the point is that, these guys, where these guys get their money, Facebook is not a paid service. Twitter is not a paid service. Their entire business model is monetizing attention. So what happens when you stop paying them attention? It's like that is a tactically
they become slightly weaker, but the individual that's logged off in this moment in time becomes marginalised, disenfranchised because of the still not. I mean, omnipotent is too grandiose a term, but the wide reach, the still wide reach of the BBC. Those who have gone against it are marginalised people, which is why they get TV license inspectors knocking on their doors and sometimes bringing the police around.
Yeah, but wait a minute. First of all, if you log off Facebook, you're not disenfranched. You're just not on Facebook.
I'm talking about the BBC in particular.
Okay, so let's go back to the BBC. So if you don't, I'm not sure how it works in your country. So if you decide to not use the BBC, right? Exactly. In other words, you say, hey, I'm going to get
your door every month, threatening letters.
Well, what about if you choose not to use? But that's only if you're using BBC network services.
No. I do not use the BBC whatsoever, and I get letters all the time saying that you need a TV license. You shouldn't be doing this or doing that without a TV license. We're going to send someone around to your house to come and check that you're not using any of these services.
That's fascinating. So then what is necessary, right? So let's take a look at that for a second. So the first thing is that 65 million people in your country, the enemy doesn't have enough people, they don't have enough inspectors to send around.
That's why no one comes around.
That's why no one comes around, exactly. So, right. So, but this is my point, is like when you, in other words, what is their power? Their power is, oh my God, they're going to send an inspector around to check the light and the police will come around. But this is, the going back to common sense, right? If people have a common sense if people have that as part of their common sense apparatus, that wait a second. There's this many of us and there's only this many of them. So come and get me. Now listen, we're edging into civil disobedience territory, right? And I realize that. And it's bad manners for me to sit, across the Atlantic Ocean and counsel you and your country on civil disobedience. Mm-hmm. I'm just saying that, there again, they don't have the actual, what we would, if this were an actual war, we'd call, or a kinetic war, we'd call combat mass. They don't have the combat mass, okay, to back up their claims or to back up their supposed imperatives. They don't have it. What they have is fear and anxiety. Yes. They can make you nervous. That's what they can. Listen, they can talk in your ear, okay, and they can make you nervous. And again, sometimes they can send the police. Now, have there been people who've been arrested behind the license fee? Maybe. Okay, is that a real risk? Well, yes. Well, because this is an actual war. So yes, this, the battle for the future of society, the battle for the future of common sense, the war really for the future of common sense it will involve some risks. It will. But at the end of the day, we have to look this thing straight in the eye and say, these people are not all that. They're just not. So I'll pause because I know I've been rambling for a bit, but yeah.
No, that's a very good time to pause because we can quite nicely move on to what I wanted to talk about next, which is the effects of the faulty collective sense making. And I'll define that as, to my mind, as a suboptimal apparatus for creating a consensus of shared meaning. As a suboptimal apparatus for creating a consensus of shared meaning. Now, some examples of the results of, say, the emergence and eventual takeover of the suboptimal apparatus are in our history books, right? Think ancient Greece, think the Romans, Incas, Aztecs, think ancient Egypt, etc. All of them great empires, but important to note from their current absence that no empire lasts forever. So I'd like to group these empires and put our empire, our modern global empire, in a distinctive subgroup for the following reason. The difference between the ancients and us is that their socio-political structures, their centres of decision-making, if you will, and power, were localised, and ours is global, which means as ours decays and fails, its fault lines stretch across the globe, and hence the fractures will be felt socially and economically, probably most importantly, by many countries and societies. Some of them, by the way, culturally disparate and really only tethered by global trade. Now, this is a difference I'd like to keep in mind while we explore the effects of the, say, emergence and expansion of our faulty collective sense-making, and how, to my mind, most crucially, it impedes not only society en masse, but the individual to grow intellectually. And I might argue actually it recedes the intellectual capacity. So again, Mike, I'll ask you more pointedly. What do you think are the most urgent lessons from what has been before that we can utilise now, and which are the lessons that just do not fit in our modern model?
Okay, so that's a good question. So let's go back to empire. I would challenge some of what you said. In other words, you said that our network is global. Let's to sum it up.
Since World War II, I would say we're a global trade empire.
Well, so here's the thing. So the first thing is
since the bomb.
Right. Okay. So the first thing is I would say that's. I don't think that's as big a difference as one might think. Because look, okay, we're talking about civilization versus anti-civilization, or civilization versus, what is outside of the civis, the city, right? Are you on the internet or not? And when I say the internet, I don't mean the internet in the sense of necessarily only the World Wide Web and what have you. I mean that 2,000 years, let's take the Romans, right? 2,000 years ago, if you were a port city on the Mediterranean, you were on the internet, right? Like that was the Mediterranean was the internet. If you had, and if you were not in a port city, but you were connected, by Roman roads or something like that, you were on the internet, right? And the Romans extended, they went from being a republic, right, which was kind of more localized, as you say, to having kind of these imperial ambitions, to being an empire. But what we saw essentially was that the difference between civilization and barbarism was the difference between being on the internet and not being on the internet. Okay, 2,000 years ago, Germany, where there was no Germany, but the Germanic tribes, okay, were a bunch of flea-bitten savages in the forests of Central Europe. They were not on the internet. Okay, the Roman legions, marched up into Gaul under Julius Caesar and conquered what we now call the French. Okay, and brought them to heel and kind of forcefully kind of put them on the internet. Right. The reason your country has is crisscrossed with Roman roads is because at a certain point the Romans sailed across the channel and went there and fought with all the tribes, the Angles and the Picts and the Iceni and all these guys and built some infrastructure and they kind of extend the internet. Okay, so our system is similar. Because our internet is not just a data internet. It's not just an internet of roads and highways. It's an internet of trade relationships, trust relationships, logistics, right? Shipping lanes, what have you. Okay. But I'm hesitant to make too many comparisons between us and the Roman Empire. First, because we don't really know where we are. Everyone, it's fashionable among some conservatives to talk about how we are just late-stage Roman Empire, and they might be right. But remember that the Roman Empire took, in the case of the United States, for example, the Roman Empire took, I think, longer to quote-unquote fall then my country has been a country, right? So we don't know where we are in this process. That's one. Two is that we don't know whether this is a collapse or whether this is a recession, not an economic recession, but if we're receding, right? If this is a tidal movement, because these things happen too. In other words, systems. Look, if you just step back away from the politics of it for a second, biological systems can have seasons. Okay, trees lose their leaves every fall. Right, you have a tree in certain climates anyway, right? You got deciduous trees; they lose their leaves every fall. Are they dead when they lose their leaves? Well, they look like they are, but are they? No. The roots are still alive. The tree's alive. Next spring, you're going to see the leaves come back. Whatever, if it's a fruit tree, you'll get fruit. Whatever. Okay. So where are we? Are we in the place where the roots are actually dying, or are we in a place where this is just a season of leaves falling? Is the plant sick? Is the plant terminally ill? Can we recover? Well, we don't know, but we're not thinking in those terms. Everyone's either thinking, it seems to me, everything's fine, or it's all over, it's all going to collapse. The lefties are saying it's going to collapse with a kind of a gleeful kind of atmosphere. Because next is the big socialist revolution, and I think sometimes the right wingers are saying, it's all going to collapse out of this kind of gleeful disgust at because they wrongly perceive this kind of futility in the war for civilization, in the war for common sense, and so they just throw up their hands. And they say, it's all going to collapse, and they're kind of delighted because then it means that well, nothing I could do anyway because it's all going to collapse. Okay, and these are all errors in thinking. We have no idea whether it's all going to collapse or not. What we know right now is that the system's under threat. That's what we know, and we know right now that we're in perhaps the fight of our lives. Okay, that's what we know. And so then the question is, what do we do next? That's the question. What do we do next? What do we build next? Now there's a lot of things we can do, and I think there's a lot of things we should do, and a lot of things that can be effective. But first, we have to start from a spirit of courage, right? And a spirit of building, right? We have to start from a perspective where we're looking around honestly and saying, okay, what can we do next? What is the situation? What is the disposition of forces? What is the enemy doing right now? Yes, they've scored a tactical victory here and here and here. Okay, what's our counter? Okay, and then you counter, and then they're just going to counter that. Go on. Sorry.
I'd just like to draw your attention to what I said previously about the distinction I made between the ancient empires and our empire, and how I think our empire is more global. And I think that their decision making and their power centers were localized, and our decision making and power centers are spread out, are global. So when you talk of when we talk of empires receding and perhaps not dying or decaying but reevaluating themselves, and you talk about the we, I think that this is a really important point. I think we now is you can't delineate the we anymore because it's too far spread out. So you can't form a hit squad.
Oh, I don't agree.
Things done.
I don't agree at all. No,
Okay.
I see what you mean, but I don't agree, and here's why. First, let's talk about power centers. The first thing is that, again, I'm looking at this from a systems point of view. Okay. Systems grow to a certain size, and their performance usually begins to degrade when they scale beyond what is their natural appropriate scale. Okay. So power centers, first of all, is a power center really a power center? That's the first thing. For example, is Davos, everyone talks about the Great Reset and, all these rich guys going to Davos and hatching their plans for reordering the world. Okay, is Davos a power center? I don't think so, actually. Now, don't get me wrong.
Is it one of the power centers? Was Rome the power center of the Roman Empire?
Well, yeah, but here's the thing. No, here's the difference, though. Here's the difference. Because Rome was definitely a power center, maybe the power center, right? Because the emperor of the But here's the thing. It was decision making with, like, at a certain time you could say that, the Roman emperor is so and so and so, and he has this many legions under him, and they have this much infrastructure and this many horse and this many skirmishers and this many swordsmen. Okay, well, now, what the Davos men have is money. Okay. But the thing is, precisely because their quote unquote power centers are so quote unquote global, okay?
Yeah.
They're stretched beyond their ability to do anything but throw money around. This is very, very important. And again, I'm not trying to say that, because again, people hear me say this shit and right away they're like, oh, Carbon Mike is being overly optimistic. I'm not saying everything is going to be fine. I'm not saying victory is assured. I'm saying let's get to a realistic appraisal of what the situation is. Now, look, you're talking about a power center. Let's take Bill Gates if we want to talk about the Davos men. Okay. Now, when Bill Gates was the head of his own corporation, right? When he was the head of Microsoft, he was essentially the emperor of Microsoft. He was an imperator. He got to say, like, what Bill Gates says goes in Microsoft. Okay. Now, Bill Gates, when he was head of a company, and people depended on him to make a living, wasn't even able to force his company to make decent software. Like, he couldn't even get their defect rates down past a certain number. I mean, everyone knows it. Everyone who was using Windows back in the day knows this. Everyone knows this. Okay?
Was there any other company that was getting their rates down successfully?
Well, I mean, it's like there were...
was it a symptom of the expansion of their software ideals?
Well, it was. I think that's a good question. I mean, there were certainly operating system vendors that had more that headed up more reliable systems. I mean, IBM used to make. Well, I think they still do make mainframes, although not very many of them. But mainframe computers, for example, of the type that many businesses used to have before the PC revolution. And some businesses still kept. Mainframe computers are notoriously stable. I mean, there are mainframe computers that haven't been rebooted since they were turned on, right? So, that is to say, I'm not implying that it's impossible for a company of a certain size to build reliable products. What I'm saying is that, Bill Gates' ability to impose one would think, in other words, that Bill Gates is a threat because he has so much money and he goes to Davos every year and he has this kind of unimpeded ability to impose his will on the world. And what I'm saying is that he didn't even have the ability to impose his will on the company that he was the head of when he was the head of it. That's all I'm getting at. So now that's not to say he is not a threat. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that you have to put the threat in perspective. That's all. Okay. If he couldn't do more than X back when he was actually running a company, then yes, he can say, one day he can talk all he wants about the future and about, well, one day we're going to do this and we're going to have, computer chips embedded in whatever, or people can hear what he says and infer that, or look at the patent log and infer that this is what he wants to do and he wants to implant this into people. All that stuff is true, let's say. But that's a separate question. We're taking that and we're looking at this guy saying he has so much money and therefore he is so powerful. Well, he's powerful in the sense he's able to wave a lot of money around. He's able to throw a lot of money around. So, that mean a lot of money means that your stupid ideas can go farther than they would if you had stupid ideas and we wrote. With a big enough engine, even a brick will fly. But let's stop imputing kind of godlike powers to these guys just because they're rich and they go to a ski resort every year to talk about their dumb ideas. That's all I'm saying. Okay. So, again, there is a threat. It's real. We do have to fight. But what exactly are we fighting? Now, going back to your thing about power centers, right? So a money center is not necessarily a power center. Money is not necessarily influence. It can be influence. You can translate money into influence, but, that takes work. And then how well you translate it into influence is also a question. And then how far that influence travels, or how the reach of that influence, is another question. And then how durable that influence is another question. Facebook is in a, let's say big social media, Facebook, Twitter, what have you, they're in a dominant position. But their position is not necessarily strong, it's just dominant. That there's a difference. Anyone who's done martial arts knows this. Anyone who does jujitsu knows you might actually, pass someone's guard. You might get them in the hold, you might whatever, and you might be in a dominant position. But if your position isn't solid, and if they know what they're doing, they can flip it on you with relative ease. That's my point, right? Is that we have to stop just putting everything in the bucket of these guys are on top and we're on the bottom and there's nothing we can do. No, they're on the top. Where are they on top exactly? And they're on the top by virtue of what exactly? And how are they vulnerable given that they're on top? And then how can we exploit those vulnerabilities given the fact that they have, and how durable is that position? That's my point, is like we have to back off from this thing of, the masters of the universe have decreed something in a ski resort meeting and we're all screwed. No, it's not like that. Again, a power center is one thing. Influence is one thing, but the nature of that power is something else. And the reach of that power is yet something else. And the influence, how far that influence carries, and then how durable that influence is, those are other things altogether. And it doesn't take much. I keep telling people, speaking of tech and operating systems, when I was in high school, Sony was the number one company in terms of personal entertainment. They invented the Walkman. Everybody and his dog had a Walkman. I mean, back then, their market cap was like $50 billion or something. They were insane. It was like Sony was it. Okay. And Apple was this dinky little company in California. No one knew if they'd even survive the 90s, actually. It was a question for a while. Okay. Now, less than a generation after that? Where is Sony in terms of personal music? And where is Apple? Right? So, the idea that dominance is something that lasts forever, it's a mistake. It's a mistake. It's a spell that has been cast on us so that we succumb to the myth of futility. But it's not futile. But we have to keep our heads, and we have to think clearly. We have to kind of be cold-blooded, but we have to be courageous. So I know that's a bit of a rambling answer, but I just wanted to I think that's a really important thing for us to keep in mind. And by the way, I can drill down. That there's concrete things we can do, but I think everything has to start from courage. Everything has to start from this kind of a warrior spirit, not a defeated spirit. It's like if you already have a defeated spirit, well, I don't know. I can't do anything for you. I'm sorry. If it's all inevitable and they've been planning it for 20 years and this and that and whatever, and the Club of Rome said this and this person said this and the Bilderberg group said that and whatever, and it's all futile, I don't know what to tell you, brother. It's like, okay, fine. Right? But if you're like, well, okay, this is the enemy. What are we going to do next? Then that's something. Because at the end of the day, that's
why I framed the question in historical terms, and I dichotomize between the ancient empires and our current empire.
That's right.
And which is why I sort of asked, what are the lessons that we could learn from what has been before, and we can utilize now, and which ones don't fit in our model. Because I think if you, in this time of intense confusion, and I think that there's many people that unfortunately don't even know they're confused.
Yes.
There's a lot of us that are not happily confused, but we're happy that we are awakened to a situation that is super complex.
Yes.
Whereas there's a lot of people that have been captured by narratives.
Yeah.
So I think if we see our solutions in historical terms, and we can point to history, undeniable history that has revolved all these ancient empires that have risen and fallen, and the similarities between their rise and fall, then perhaps we can start thinking. We can start thinking in more basic terms, really, in more grounded terms. Yeah,
I think that's right. I mean, look, so for example, in all I think in all cases everywhere, one is that the first thing is that the family is the foundation really of society, of civilization, right?
Yeah.
The family,
BLM not too keen on the family.
BLM is not too keen, and we see exactly why. Exactly.
Must be
right?
said.
Because they have these, right? Because they have this Marxist, pseudo-Marxist really, because they're worse than actual Marxists. This revolutionary idea, they're gonna disrupt this and destroy that and what have you. Yeah, they're not in favor of the family at all. So the family is the root of civilization. That's the first thing. The second thing is that there are pattern. Okay, let me back up a second. So trying to get to concrete things, right? Us versus the ancients. Okay, well, here's a kind of an eternal principle for you. The longer your reach is, the more fragile it is. This is a basic thing. It's like I'm a big history geek. I'm also a big history of warfare geek, right? If an army stretches its supply lines too thin because it pushes too far too fast, it's highly vulnerable.
Hitler into Russia.
Exactly. There's
That's
something.
a good modern example.
Exactly right, because more than one army has come to grief behind this big ambitious push into Russia. And what's funny is it's not even like the Russian army had to be that competent, because they weren't that. I mean, they were brave, they were fierce, they were numerous, but they weren't that competent. They weren't even that well equipped. I mean, you know some of the stories. You know, divisions going to the field or elements going to the field where only the front line of guys have rifles, and when they get shot, the guys in the back come pick up the rifles and start shooting. I mean, it was a shit show for a lot of, but that big push, some of what they had to do was just sit back and let the elements take a toll, right? It was like winter came on, oh man, right? And these guys got wiped out, in large part by Russian winter. So, and this is a lesson for us that, one, nature will also have its say. That's one, right? And again, the hubris, your enemy's hubris can lead to his downfall. Your enemy's hubris can open up vulnerabilities that you can exploit, right? And that sometimes you retreat tactically in order to force him to overextend himself. And then you attack. Again, going back to Russia. Okay. That's one thing. What is also true is that the same things that, so take the Roman Empire. If you listen to, Gibbon, right, what he says is that the primary cause of the fall of the Roman Empire was Christianity. Actually, it was this viral influence that kind of hijacked the thing from the inside. Okay. So what that means is that if the power that presided over the internet 2,000 years ago was able to be hijacked and essentially taken down and taken over by this weirdo cult of former nomads with this oddball belief in the human soul and what have you. You know what I'm saying? And the strange, one God, weird, right? Hiding out in the catacombs, outlaws, every now and then they'd catch them and throw them to the lions, literally, right? And that was cancel culture 2,000 years ago. They'd catch you and you'd be eaten by wild beasts or nailed to a wooden structure, yeah? To die of asphyxiation or thirst, right? Okay, that was cancel culture. And if those people managed to virally hijack the Roman Empire, well, then to me what that means is, well, this viral hijacking thing bears investigating, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Right? It's like, well, why? And this is why I get so impatient with especially conservative Christians who are despairing all the time. I'm like, well, are you kidding me? It's like, in other words, Christians versus the Roman Empire. Well, who ultimately won that fight? Well, it wasn't the Roman Empire. And then you could say, yeah, I know. Historians are going to say, well, the Roman Catholic Church is the reincarnation of the Roman Empire. It's okay, but you know what I mean, okay, right? It's like these people hiding out like rats in a warren, in the belly, in the underbelly of this vast, cruel pagan empire, ended up being quite influential, actually, right?
Yeah,
so that's all I'm
not
getting
too
at.
sure. I mean, I know it was Constantine that was the first Christian Roman Empire, but I'm not too sure of the creep of the trajectory of the creep of Christianity onto the Roman Empire, but a creep nevertheless.
Well, yeah,
it was.
Well, yeah, and listen, and listen, let's not take the history thing too far. It's like, when, in our time, it's going to be different. It's not going to be exactly like that. My point is merely that large organizations, or organizations of any kind, systems, let's pull back. Systems are vulnerable, okay, to viral influences. And see, part of the problem is that we haven't been crafting the right viruses. That's the first thing. And when I say the right viruses, I mean the right, of course, informational viruses, because a virus is just information. That's all it is. And a virus is able to infect your cells because it has it's coated with the right proteins, and it kind of can do the magic handshake and gets inside and then subverts the mechanism. And one of our problems has been that we have not been focusing on like how to how to infiltrate certain mechanisms, how to get these ideas into the system and let them propagate. Partly because we've been playing we've been going along with the script, right? And the script is, and again, I'm getting to this. I know you want to focus on practical things, so I'm pushing on that, right? So, the script is, you right wingers say we need to have immigration controls. And then left winger says you're Islamophobic and da 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 da, and the right winger starts citing crime stats, in like Muslim communities or whatever, or saying or talking about jihadis and terrorism, whatever. And then the left winger says, you see, you think all Muslims are terrorists, and then you go and that's the script, okay. Now, at the end of that little play, no one is convinced. I mean, in other words, everyone who was on one side of it is still on that same side. In other words, your viral influence is zero, okay. Now, if instead we on the right, we conservatives, if instead we start to craft our arguments differently, craft them as if they were viruses, right, then maybe we can go off the script. So that when a left-winger says, we should have open borders and let, Syrians or whoever, or Libyans or whoever come, unrestricted, what have you, or whatever they say. That instead of, launching into a diatribe about terrorists and jihadis and what have you, what you might say is, well, I can see why you say that, because you see them as tokens. I see them as people. That's a good viral right-wing response.
Yes.
Right? It's like, in other words, I see. You think it's like you don't respect, in other words, you're advocating for open borders because you don't respect the people of other countries enough to greet them at the border like human beings. Because here's the thing. What's my opinion of a Syrian? My opinion of a Syrian is that he's a human being like me. He is my brother in the human family. But you might not get along with your brother. You might argue, But so I have the baseline respect that I have for all humans. That's the default. And what that means is because he's a man like me, if he wants to come in my house, I get to say, hey, brother, I see you want to come in my house. What's your name? What do you bring to the table? This is what I'm doing. I have these rules in my house. We take off our shoes at the door or whatever, blah, blah, blah. We have dinner at 6, but who are you? Like, what's your deal? What skills do you have? What do you bring to the table? Who knows you? Who can vouch for you? Right? And you talk to him like a man. See? And that's a sign of respect. And then you turn around and say to this left wing, it's like, you don't respect people. You see them as tokens. You just want to move these tokens here or there on the map. And it's like, I think like this Syrian is a Syrian. He has a country. His country has a history. It's a troubled history. Maybe he might want to go back and rebuild his country right now. Not right now, but at some point, he's going to go rebuild his country. Doesn't Syria need registered nurses and chemists and petroleum engineers and web developers and what have you? So why, in other words, if I respect him, if I see him deeply, which is point one in the Foundationist Manifesto, if I see this person deeply, then I can have a whole lot of difficult conversations with him. And there's no way any person can tell me that I'm having those conversations out of hatred or out of any kind of a phobia. It's like, no, we're going to have these difficult discussions with my brother over there from Syria because he's my brother from Syria. Now, the same thing is true of the gender debate. Speaking of something else that's been a real kind of flashpoint in the war against common sense, the war against sense making. And he said, listen, man, you know, in the United States, we have the assistant health secretary is a man who turned himself, quote unquote, into a woman, who had transition surgery or whatever, and who decided that he was a woman. Now, look, you know, you say, well, Carbon Mike said that Rachel Levine is really a man, and that's transphobic. Well, a phobia is like, wait a minute. First of all, a phobia is irrational fear or hatred. I ain't afraid of Rachel Levine, and I don't know Rachel. I don't know him. Okay. But my opinion of Rachel Levine, broadly speaking, is that he's a human being like me. He's a human being. He's my brother in the human family. Okay? But what does that mean? Because he's a human being like me, it's like he's as full of shit as I am. You see what I'm saying? He's not right about everything. We may have to argue. So then the viral talking point is, yeah, I can see why you're so obsessed with so-called dead naming and trans women stuff, because you don't see Rachel Levine as a human being. You see Rachel Levine as a marker, as a token, which is why you have an acronym, which is why you have this, instead of saying lesbian people, gay people, you say LGBTQI, da-da-da-da-da. That's the problem. See, and we're not calling them out on that shit. You know, we're going back to, you know, again, we're following the script. We have to stop following that script. It's like, yo, why you got all these acronyms, man? Like, why are you turning people, you know, you're up to something. Why are you trying to turn people into acronyms? In other words, because the fact is, you know, you might say, first of all, it's like this whole community thing. It's like, if I say something that offends a lesbian, okay, then she and I need to sit and talk about it, and maybe I need to apologize. But there's no such thing as me saying something that offends the LGBTQIA da-da-da-da-da community. There's no such thing. That's a lie. You're lying. Stop lying. Stop lying. You're trying to simplify human beings. I'm coming from a standpoint of respecting human beings who are as full of shit as I am, so we can have a conversation. I'm not going to get along with my lesbian sister all the time. When I say I'm an only child, but, you know, like, you know, my you know, lesbians, I mean, they're my sisters. They're, you know, they're human beings. I'm not going to get along with them all the time. Sometimes we're going to fight. Do you think this? You think you're all that, whatever. And then we'll figure it out somehow. Same thing with my gay brothers. Same thing with my trans brothers and sisters. You know, it's like, I'm not going to get along with them all the time, but I respect them enough to say no to them when they say something, when they suggest.
And our Muslim brothers and sisters.
And I'll say it again.
And our Muslim brothers and sisters.
Exactly, well. Same thing. Exactly. It's like, hey, you know, my brother who's a Muslim, you know, he may come, okay, we're going to argue about shit. That's fine. You know, we might fight. That's okay. It's okay. We don't need a bunch of grad students, okay, you know, jumping in the middle of it and explaining to us how to coexist. Mind your business. I'm talking to my Muslim brother over here about why he wants to make his home in my country. I have legitimate questions. You know, you say, well, we should have open borders. You don't have open borders in your house. When you go home at night, you lock the door. Why you lock it? Because you hate everybody? No, because you know that someone who may have bad intent can walk into your house and destroy you if you don't lock the door, if you don't challenge people at the door. Who are you? What's your business here? What have you? All the politicians who are all talking about open borders, you try to go up in where they live and see how open the border is. You see, but so that all that by way of saying is, I know I'm rambling a bit, but all I'm saying is that, like, if we start to craft better arguments, you see what I'm saying, and not just fall into the reflexive opposition to the, because again, you can tell, you see it happen on the news, on programs, on Twitter, everywhere. It's like, this guy says this, and this guy launches that, blah, 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 blah. And then it's like, you know, then you're already in their house. You're playing their game, and it's a losing ball game. The race thing is the same goddamn thing. And again, as a black person, that drives me crazy to no end. You know what I'm saying? It's like you have the lefties who say, well, da-da-da-da-da, and BLM, and defund the police and whatever. And then conservatives, dumbass conservatives, right on cue, launch into black-on-black crime and black people on the plantation. And they're saying all these racial hot-button words that they know by this time are going to send the left-wingers into conniption fits. But they never get to the root of the thing. The root of the thing is like, oh, and then you have on the fringes, of course, you have the dumbass racists who are like, well, black people just have lower IQs. All that, that's Steve Saylor, Vox Day shit. Okay. But meanwhile, there's all these perfectly good foundational conservative arguments. Why is there so much black on black crime? Well, why is there so much Russian on Russian crime in the slums of Russia? Why is there so much Chechen on Chechen crime in the slums of Grozny? Why is there so much Indian on Indian crime in the slums of India? It's like, listen, it's crime. And, if someone commits a crime, you gotta go after him, you gotta arrest him, you gotta charge him, you gotta try him. That's it. But the fact is that the reason you have a persistent black underclass in this country is because the family has been destroyed. That's it. I don't know why everyone is searching around for why. Listen, the family is the root of civilization. If you destroy it, you get barbarism. That's it. Well, who destroyed the family? Well, partly liberals. Do you want to own your shit, liberals? You're always telling America you need to own your crimes and own this, and always telling your people you need to own the Crusades and own this and all. Okay, so liberals, when are you going to own the destruction of the American, specifically the black American family? Now, conservatives played a part too, but the major part was played by liberals. When are you going to own that? The young black men running around the streets of the cities of my country who don't know how to act are doing that not because they're black, not because they're low IQ, not because they're desperate, not because they're hungry. It's because they were not civilized in the family, which is where people learn to be civilized. That is the root and the core of human civilization. If you destroy the family, you destroy society. If you destroy society, all hell breaks loose. In America, in UK, in China, in Russia, everywhere, every race, every creed, every color, every religion. Always. That's it. That's the answer. Okay? Now, if as conservatives, we started pushing back against woke bullshit and again, it's not like I'm a political expert. Maybe I'm sure someone could sum that up in a better, more pithy talking point than I just did. But the point is that if we started pushing back like that, the nature of the game would change. Of course it would. The nature of the game would change. Now, of course,
as you speak, I'm impressed with the idea of these cool, easy viruses, these opposing viruses from the other side, because the tragedy of warfare, and especially the tragedy of kinetic warfare, is that one side improves its technological arsenal, and it defeats the other side. Then the other side goes into retreat and it retrofits what it's been beaten by. It comes back and it wins, and you get that cycle, and that is the tragedy of warfare. But if we can somehow not retrofit what we're being opposed with, what is flung at us, but instead come up with almost complementary, or I don't know, what would you call them? Viruses that flip arguments without harming them.
Well,
in a way.
I see what you mean. I would say I wouldn't
not benign. Benign's the wrong word.
Yeah. No, but
something that doesn't harm.
Well, I would say this. I would say that doesn't. We're not flipping anything. It's kind of like you could say undermines it, right? I would say that.
Even that is too harsh for now.
Well, no, because it is. Here's why it's undermining. Here's why my conservative, my foundationist pushback undermines their argument, because I'm digging down to the roots.
Nobody likes to be undermined, though, Mike. That's the thing.
Pardon me?
Nobody likes to be undermined, especially.
Okay. No. Hey, whoa. We're in a war. Okay, so I don't care what the enemy likes. That's not the point. I'm not trying. By the way, I'm not trying to convince the enemy. This is the other thing we have to remember. If I'm talking with, not that I would ever talk to what's his name, Jeremy Corbyn or any of his camp followers. But it's like, if I'm talking to Corbyn or a Corbynista, right, I'm not going to convince, like some middle-aged person in government, where I'm not going to convince that person. That's not why we're having an argument. I'm trying to convince the people who are sitting on the fence, young people mostly. Okay. That's who I'm trying to convince. Okay. And my foundationist argument, my argument from the fundamentals of humanity, right? My argument from the human ideal, my argument from the brotherhood of man, okay? That does undermine their position, because I'm digging down further than they are. They're all on the surface. I'm trying to get down to the roots. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. This is so yes, I want to undermine them. Of course, because again, this is a war. I want his position to collapse. Exactly. When I dig under and I get down to the roots, that's when I put myself all the way at the bottom. But
what happens when you get collapse of your opponent? They retreat and they retrofit.
Well, I don't know what to tell you, brother. Yeah, this is a war. You're going to counter, and then they're going to find a way to counter that. And you have to find a way to counter that. I can't tell you what's going to happen 15 moves in the future. I'm saying what we're doing now is not working. So what we're doing now is not working. All bets are off. We have to change up now. Right? And then let's see what happens when we change up and we counter, and then maybe they come back and counter. Look, because maybe, just maybe, they're going to have a problem where they've spent so long, okay, having people nod along to their bullshit, that they may be on the back foot for another 10 years. You don't know. Because remember, these people, people who are on this woke agenda right now, right, they have been sailing along with pretty much zero friction inside their organizations.
Yes.
And because conservatives have done such a terrible job of talking to black people, talking to young people, motivating people, talking to other ethnic minorities, mobilizing that kind of spirit of courage, because they've done such a terrible job, it seems like the weight has been more on their side. It's like the leftists are carrying the day. So we don't know. So you undermine their position starts to collapse. It may trigger a cascade. They may start looking at each other and being like, hey, you know something? You're kind of, this has happened before. When lefties start eating their own, right? The morale collapses. You don't know what's going to happen. But the point is that you can't start from the thing of, but if you do that, then all they'll do. You can't do that. Because again, that's not what you do in a warfare. No soldier does this. No soldier says, okay, we're going to mount a raid and go and blow up that enemy fortification. And then someone says, but then they're just going to come back and shoot at us again. Well, yes. Right. That's what war is. I don't know what to tell you.
Okay, so next time, because I think we should leave it just about now. Mm-hmm. Can we come back and talk about these opposing sides and how we do get in part two? I think I said my definition of faulty collective sense-making was a suboptimal apparatus for creating a consensus of shared meaning. Yeah. So if we could come back and see if we can drill down into what we can envisage as a consensus of shared meaning, who shares it, who eventually, who's first to share it, who's second to share it, who's lagging behind, and what these different, the power play of these different groups. Do you think we could do that?
I think that's great. And let me put a pin in this, or
I know it's futurizing a bit, but it's worth it.
No, I think so. Let me just. The other thing I definitely want to talk about next time is my half-assed theory about the Cold War having been the root of some of these problems in sense-making. Because very quickly, it's my theory that because we did that same thing of falling into the reflex opposition, right, instead of digging down to the foundations of what we are and why we do what we do. We came out of that with
quite nicely.
Right, exactly. And we came out of that conflict, came out of the Cold War with two neoliberal parties with different cultural paint jobs on them, and that's why in your country, for example, you don't have a real conservative party or a real liberal party. You got the Tories and Labour, and that's just about it, right? So, definitely want to touch on that stuff next time. Yeah, it'll be good.
Okay. Well, as always, I've learned a lot. I love talking to you, mate.
Hey, same here, brother. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I will see you next time. See you very soon. Next Wednesday, another hour and a bit, and we'll keep doing it until we get to the bottom of all these topics, which will be until one of us dies, probably.
Sounds good.
See you later, mate.
All right, man. Take care.